Hero Club presents Los Ingobernables de Tokusatsu.
Welcome to Los Ingobernables de Tokusatsu, episode 68, because this time I got it right, unlike last week, where I said 68, when it was 60-frickin-7, but I'm your host, Wheelchair21, co-creator, co-founder, yada yada yada, you know that by now, and with me is my co-host in crime, who is not Janitor Joker, but the other Michael in Mike and the Morning, Soundout12.
I think I should just get a new name at this point. Who needs branding for 10 years?
Who needs... I know, you could be like Visible Ninja, who changes his name like every 5 days.
The rebrand man.
I don't know why, but that should be his new gimmick, just the rebrand man with his rebrand man reviews.
Speaking of brands, let's talk about Power Rangers.
Oh, we're just gonna jump right in there. We're just gonna avoid that whole Neo Deca driver, which made us go, yay!
Bruh, there's 26 chapters. We don't dive into this now. We'll never get out of here.
I mean, Saban got out of here, but that was probably a good thing.
Speaking of Saban, did you know that he sang all the Sentai theme songs from Go Ranger to Jetman to Japanese executives in order to secure the license to Power Rangers?
Yes.
Did you also know that basically he gave up on the franchise in recent days because he felt like he did everything he could with it?
Yeah.
AKA, it started losing money.
AKA, how about you explain exactly what this episode is for those who didn't tune into last week's episode, or stay tuned to the ending?
Everyone go watch last week's episode, so I don't have to repeat myself.
Bitch, just do it.
Just insert an audio clip right here.
I'm not inserting an audio clip. That takes too much time and effort.
Yeah, but it'd take less time than me explaining it again.
All you gotta say is what we're talking about today.
We're talking about, I opened a magic sarcophagus of information, and we're going to go through it.
But why don't you tell them what that sarcophagus is?
Well, why don't you tell them what it is?
Why don't you tell them this was your idea?
It's your show.
Hey, just tell them.
The Power Rangers Ultimate Visual History book released last month, and I have read the entire thing front to back, and I have found all kinds of little nuggets of information that we are going to discuss today, and it'll be going in chronological order of chapters in said book.
I don't know why, but I feel like I need to see the pictures that accompany them, but you know what? We don't have time for that shit.
Actually, none of these informations really actually have to do with any of the pictures in the book.
Oh, thank God.
Because with the pictures are straightforward for the most part, concept art and stuff. What I'm looking at is the text, that part that the Power Rangers fans don't look at very often. It's called reading.
You mean the ones that didn't have a proper edumacation?
That's most of them. If anyone's ever had discussions with people on the internet about Power Rangers, people need to read more. That's what I'm saying.
This is going to be the true burn notice listing, especially after like several people from Ranger sites have started following me now, and I'm like, is it because we trashed them, or because they just think we're cool guys and don't know about us trashing them?
If you're listening to this podcast, you have enough of an intelligence to not fall into the category of people I'm talking about right now.
Or you are, and you don't realize you're a part of that category.
No, if you're listening to this podcast, you were smart enough to find our website and read a title called Los Ingobernables de Tokusatsu. So if you can read that, you can read anything.
I mean, some people do think that we're actually in Spanish, speaking Spanish, when it's just a pun because we're wrestling fans that also like Tokusatsu.
So anyways. Also, we did get some clarification on what actually happened with the Bioman pilot in this book. So just keep rolling with us.
Just go.
Determined to make the idea work, Saban and his team strove to improve the concept and shot several different 8 to 12-minute teaser presentations based on Bioman. So basically they said they made a lot of different versions of it, and they wanted to expand it into different markets. They did a straight dub, a comedy version, a serious version, a campy version, and they experimented with different ideas of how they were going to get this right and find something that was going to resonate with a kid audience in America. But there was no interest in Bioman.
Like, here's the thing, I think with Bioman, it's one of those ones where, like, having seen some of it, a good portion of it, I don't think it would have translated well if you just straight up dubbed that show, or even tried to adapt it. I don't know where you could have effing gone with that series for American audiences. It's a good series, but I don't think it would have resonated well with the North American crowd.
Yeah, basically the only reason Power Rangers ever happened was because of Margaret Loesch, who was in charge of Fox Kids at the time, and she was also the reason why Batman the Animated Series came into existence.
Oh yeah,
weren't they celebrating?
I was gonna say, weren't they celebrating her on Twitter today? Like, a lot of people were talking about her, or was that another chick I'm thinking of that worked on Batman the Animated Series?
That was Andrea Romano, the voice director.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
So essentially, with Power Rangers, they decided to pick G-Ranger because Jetman was going to be hard to adapt due to its more violent content. And so basically, from there, they end up, the original production name for the casting call for Power Rangers was Phantoms, which has nothing to do with anything in the show.
Yeah, you know what's even weirder too is like the book doesn't actually talk about like that actual Galaxy Ranger pilot, does it? Or is it mentioned there? Like
Doesn't mention Galaxy Rangers at all.
doesn't mention the Galaxy Rangers or like the biorhythmic like teasers footage we saw with Dacascos at all.
It does. That's what they were talking about with the Bioman pilots. They shot.
They just said about the shot several versions, but they never go in depth. You're saying, which is kind of interesting that they didn't go more in depth about that.
Essentially, it kind of boils down to no one freaking remembers and no one can find the tape.
That makes more sense, actually, logically, because I was going to say, did the book explain why they didn't remember, or does it just end off?
No, it just has interview quotes, and that's like all the information they get is from people that worked on it.
Yeah, I think it would have been better if they could have dug deeper, you know what I'm saying? I feel like this is something that fans should know. Like, you know,
it is something we should know, but I think it's also like the very nature, and reading this book too, really got into the mindset of I realized that a lot of people that work on Power Rangers do it as a one and done kind of thing every year, and they're just kind of like, they remember some things, but they don't remember a whole lot. They don't keep track of stuff. Footage is just gone. There's outtakes that are probably long missing at this point. It doesn't seem like Power Rangers is a show that got archived during its production history like other TV shows have, which is why I think we just have, sparse information to begin with. So this book's kind of nice because it actually has interviews with a bunch of people that aren't cast members that only vaguely remember, some things. These are actual production people that actively worked on this show for months before they started filming.
And may vaguely remember some things.
And may vaguely remember stuff. It gets better later in the book because people remember more recent events. But having worked in the film industry, I know how film people are just kind of like, all right, that was one job, let's move on to this job kind of idea. And so stuff just gets forgotten at that point. Moving on to Mighty Morphin Season 1, the reason why there was gym equipment in Ernie's juice bar was simply because they wanted to have an active background where you wouldn't just have a juice bar where people are just sitting there. So they're like, oh, let's put gym equipment in there. And it was all gym equipment that was taken from a commercial prop house. So to do like advertisements, promotional videos, stuff to do with that. So they just borrowed all the gym equipment from there, which is why sometimes certain pieces of equipment would just change around and move around the room because they'd have to return it or someone else was renting it or something like that.
That makes sense because also with it being a youth center too, not all youth centers are made in the way that it's supposed to be like in that place always stationary. Some are more recreational, like, an actual high school gym where the teacher has to go and get the bag of balls or the equipment that you're going to be using for like the indoor gym stuff. So it makes kind of sense how Ernie's was set up, was that it's just like, oh yeah, if you need to put up a punching bag, there are a shit ton of loops and hooks on the ceiling, so you just got to go, get a ladder and hook it up yourself kind of ordeal.
It was modular at that point.
Which actually makes it why it's actually like in hindsight, it actually explains why Ernie's place actually did fairly like well business, was because it was like, you come in, you do what you need to do, as long as you're a teen or young adult, just come in here, blah blah blah, and we also open it up to like charity events and drives and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it does bring up the question though, who moves all that equipment around every day?
Ernie or the actual people who want to use it from the storage facility room?
There is a neat chapter, like there's only a couple pages about like the process of making Power Rangers. It's not something we're going to go into because it's, the process of making Toku, right?
I mean, we already know how Tokusatsu is made. You put a guy in a suit, you fight another guy in a suit, maybe an explosion goes off, maybe the guy gets caught on fire,
I mean, it goes into the process of writing where they go through the Sentai footage, they pick what scenes that work.
You mean everything that we've heard ever at a Power Morphicon? Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of info in this book that is stuff we've heard before, but there's some stuff we haven't. What's interesting is they do have a copy of a call sheet for an episode of Power Rangers. They're shooting in the command center all day. Yeah, Chip Lynn has been going by the name Chip Lynn since Mighty Morphin Season 1. Just for the record.
Yeah, no. He's a weird stickler where, like, Years was, like, Chip, but then credits have him as Judd. And, like, he's a weird stickler for using the name Chip. And I'm like, dude, most of the filmography either refers to you as Judd or Chip. Deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, he was the unit production manager at the time, and Jonathan Zatcher was the line producer. So they were definitely there since the beginning, and they kind of moved up the ranks later on when... Well, we'll get to that when we get to Turbo. Yeah, I mean, it's just more talking about, like, the crazy production schedule. Again, stuff we didn't really not know. They go in depth about villains. They talk about, stunt scenes and stunt actors. Just going to keep flipping here. By the way, there's one paragraph for Jew 2. Just one.
It's just funny that they made it just one. Just one.
Just one. That just mentions what it is. Let's see. Here's this interesting part. So the Zords for Season 2 were the Thunder Zords, right? And there's these sequences where the Dino Zords turn into the Thunder Zords. What ended up happening was that they went and bought a set of the Dino Zords at a Toys R Us and painted them to look more high quality. Then they went and found a Japanese import shop that was in Los Angeles and bought a Dyrano to convert them into puppets so that they could puppet the animation of the Dino Zords becoming the Thunder Zords.
Yeah, I know, and these are also the same idiots that accidentally turned the Lion Thunder Zord to have extra legs that it never actually had.
Exactly. But yeah, so basically they made puppets out of the toys, but they had to go find the puppets. Yeah, and then Season 2 was when they started doing more of their own fight sequences.
I thought there would be more depth talking about MMPR, but it seems like there's nothing really too trivial about any of the MMPR stuff for production-wise, honestly.
It's a lot of the same kind of stuff that we heard about because MMPR is that season that always gets the most press coverage. It's hard to find there's like a lot of information here, but again, it's a lot of stuff that we've heard before.
Yeah, it seems redundant. So if you want to just skip ahead to like end of 3 or whatever into Zeo, I mean that's fine.
Yeah, the Zeo stuff is where it starts getting more interesting.
Yeah, because I would think like when they started doing like Season 3, like the only noticeable thing was like, oh, when we made it more episodic and tried to do an arc storyline and yada yada yada.
Yeah, talking about Mighty Morphin the movie, because there was the section on that. It's kind of interesting because they talk about how they wanted to kind of make it more elaborate than the TV show, and that they just essentially wanted to make it better than the TV show and have nothing to do with the TV show. They also talk about how the helmets were supposed to have retractable visors, which there's a set picture roaming around out there when they tried that, but they decided against it. They talk about Dulcia and how she changed actresses back and forth. There's even concept art of Snoogle, which was going to be her pet at one point. So there was a lot of footage from Mighty Morphin the movie that does not exist, even though the book talks about scenes that were filmed. We've never seen that footage come to the light of day, which is a real shame.
The only thing that I've ever seen are actual stills from the footage that like exist, like real promotional stills.
Like there's promotional stills, but that's about it. And some of those are in this book, which is nice to see. They talked about how they wanted to make sure that Amy Jo Johnson leaving as the Pink Ranger would feel more special. The previous replacement Rangers they did, that was a very haphazard thing because of the contract disputes. So they wanted to make sure that Kimberly's departure felt actually special and like it was an actual event and it was part of the story instead of just, oh, she's gone now.
And then they just throw Karen Ashley to the hyenas.
Essentially, yes. And that was just Karen Ashley wanted to leave the show, and that was the way that they decided to do it. They talked about with Zeo they wanted to change the suits because they wanted to make sure that it kept the series fresh and interesting, as opposed to just keeping the same Jew Ranger costumes for 4 years at that point.
That makes sense. That was something I think we've already knew about, was that they realized at this point if they kept the costumes consistent, people wouldn't like start to not be able to differentiate what the hell was actually going on. So they're like, let's just keep the Zeo as the O-Ranger suits and move forward. I think that was like the smartest production method they could have done at that time, because they were like, well, David Yost doesn't really want to be here anymore, so we're going to...
Well, actually, funny you mentioned David Yost, that was going to be my next point. David Yost didn't have a say in not being a Ranger. According to this book, which is this interview with David Yost, he says, I remember getting a phone call saying, look, you're not going to be a Power Ranger anymore. We're going to have you on as Billy, and you can be an advisor and helper to the team. He says Yost admits he was disappointed, but at the same time understood it was not unprecedented for a television show to go into a new direction with its stories and characters. So it wasn't so much that he was willing to leave, but he was thinking it was probably just time for Billy to move on if the producers are saying, well, time for you to go. So in a way, it kind of seems like he was a little bit pushed out.
Yeah, because I know he was pushed out, but the way, like, I guess he's told it at conventions rather than, is more or less like he was uncertain. Like, he said, like, production did want to have Billy go in this other direction, and I was okay with it, but also at the same time, like, he wanted to go. Like, it was like one of those things where it just felt like it was one of these, like, mutual, like, they wanted to evolve the character slash, devolve the character in some areas, of screen time, and he was just like, fuck it, I'll leave.
He also left after the harassment charges because he was harassed on the book does not mention anything about the harassment that happened, which ended up causing him to leave the show suddenly. The book does not get into like the deeper, like seedier parts of
Well,
the
I have a
Power
feeling that the
history.
reason is because it's an official produced thing by Saban, that even if that got produced, he would not be happy. But with Hasbro having it, Hasbro might be like, no, they can do a more accurate tell-all kind of story in the future.
Right, yeah, it definitely doesn't go into the darker stuff. It's more about celebrating the history and looking into the behind the scenes aspect, not so much David Yost got harassed for being gay. That's the kind of stuff that doesn't fit the tone of this book.
Yeah, like I do see it as being a part of an actual book that Hasbro may authorize in the future, because like even though Hasbro is still a kid family friendly thing, because they have Star Wars and Transformers that sometimes talks about these drastic like in depth things, like look at their special features when they address the whole Optimus Prime thing, and like
Yeah.
they censor out when people actually say like, oh, we were in the director's room and blah 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 CEO or blah 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 executive producer looks at me and goes, that is a great beeping idea. Like, they actually beep him saying the word fuck.
Yeah, and that's the thing is I think Hasbro could do something. I would love to see like a Power Rangers, like maybe like a biography kind of book that's like memoirs of actors and maybe just kind of delving into like some of the more deeper truths of what goes on behind the scenes. Like a tell-all
I really want
memoir.
that because one of the funniest things is how when Saban got the license back, the actors had to be yet again more quiet about what they used to be thrown around out on social media or out on conventions. Because like remember, conventions were allowed to have 18 plus panels, but then Saban was like, you can't do this with my actors, and they're like, they're not your actors anymore. Well, it's my brand and I can sue you for libel, and everyone's like, wait, what?
Yeah, that's another side of the Ranger spectrum. Let's move on to Turbo, a Power Rangers movie, because there's actually some really good stuff in here.
Oh, you mean the part where we highlighted on last week's episode? Judd Lin, Chip Lin, Shirakura
No,
in
that's later.
disguise. Okay.
We're just talking about the movie.
Ah, yeah, the 3 hours of unedited footage. You mean the Zack Snyder cut?
Not exactly. So, first of all, it was a 4-month shoot using 10 locations in several studios throughout Southern California. There was a miniature unit and Hawaii unit that shot background footage and used extensive use of a pirate ship in San Pedro and an underwater tank in Marina del Rey. The decision was made to keep production designer and costume designer and art director from the TV show onto the movie. That's why a lot of the Turbo Power Rangers movie stuff fits the style of the TV show, because they brought the same art director, production designer, and costume designer, so everything seemed more consistent. They did that because they felt like there was a disconnect between Mighty Morphin the movie and the TV series, and they thought that Turbo would be stronger if it was connected to the TV series itself.
Well, yeah, I already knew that part. A lot of people figured that just because of
Yeah, it's kind of like one of those obvious things that at least it was designed to be intentional at that point. There's the stuff about Steve Cardenio's leaning, which isn't really that big of news anymore. That's been pretty out there. They just talk about like designing, Divatox's stuff. The general speaking of here's the actual movie stuff, but where we get interesting is into the volcano. So as we know, we found out recently after this book was published from, I think it was
one of the art and concept art, like one of the actual suit designers.
One of the producers, she put out on Twitter some concept images of Rangers in scuba suits, a different logo for the movie, and it was going to be called Power Rangers Race to the Volcano. I believe that name is mentioned in this book at some point. I can't find. Oh yeah, here it is. The original script for the film, titled Race to the Volcano, was 150 pages, which would have made a very long movie, especially one aimed at audiences. So a number of scenes were filmed that ended up on the cutting room floor, including a fight with a crocodile, an underwater sequence in which the Rangers befriend a mermaid, a longer journey through the volcano, and more development of Justin.
And guess what? Justin really needed the development because the series really made me hate him.
Really did.
Also,
the
don't
thing
forget the
is
time
that-
when they pull out a fucking flamethrower on the back of the VHS cassette.
That, I think, was the fight with the crocodile.
But they were on. Never mind. I'm not gonna get into this.
Here's the thing. It doesn't say "and other scenes," which means the fight between Divatox, like the fight where like Divatox destroys the Zeo powers. I think that's just something that was probably tossed around. Maybe was in that script, but was never shot as much
No,
as.
no, because Johnny said he was in a torn up Zeo suit. He said I actually was in a suit. Like that part of it was shot. Cause
That's what he says, but there's nothing else to back him up on that.
true.
And that's like it's like it's one of those things where I'm like, I want to believe you, but there's nothing to back you up on that.
Why do
And
I have a feeling he's just? I have a feeling he's remembering test footage takes.
It's very possible because if it was in the script, they would have done some kind of test shot to do a damaged costume kind of thing.
And that's what I'm saying. Maybe he's like doing test shots. Maybe they actually had them wear suits, maybe on the beach, like one day to see how it would look on the light, especially because they wanted to shoot that scene at night. And they're like, "Oh, we can't do this. It's too, eh."
Right. Plus, there's the other thing of like with Power Rangers production, you're just going so much, you're probably delirious and misremembering things.
Here's the other thing too that people need to also remember is one thing that even the fans point out is the concept of the Zeo powers being defeated by Divatox makes no sense in general since they're supposed to be the greatest power in the universe.
Right. So, continuing on with the volcano part, there was actually supposed to be, I think, 3 more sets used in the movie, including a lava set, a serpent's temple, and a serpent corridor. So, essentially, they talk about there's 2 amazing sets that never got made to the final cut. In an early version of the film, on their way to the volcano on Maranthius, the Rangers first enter a small chamber dome filled with colored quicksand and bubbling lava. The only way to make it across was by jumping onto several large rocks. It says this was a very cool set, but it was complicated to film because it was essentially a swimming pool of sticky colored liquid. So it just seems like they were going to build these really elaborate sets and have more like the adventure, because they talk about in the book as well that they wanted to be an adventure movie, kind of like Indiana Jones, where it's like the Rangers are going on this adventure and it's on a time clock. It's like that's where the race to the volcano part of this comes from.
Yeah, when I heard the title of the film though, I said this is a laughable joke, like just that title alone.
What, Race to the Volcano?
Race to the Volcano seems like it would be more of an episodic thing than like a full-length feature film.
Right, I think that's why they switched the title. I think Turbo Power Rangers movie is still a weak title.
Turbo was just weak in general, but that's another story.
Right. Anyways, they also talk about how there was hundreds of gallons of metal cellulose that was laying on the floor of the Rangers had a rock hop to get over. After 3 days, the stuff started to smell, and we had to keep that set for almost 2 weeks. So that was essentially, it sounds like the lava stuff they were using on the main set, where the actual like climax of the film takes place. That lava stuff apparently was smelled really badly. The Hall of Snakes was a great thin hallway with elaborate statues of cobras on the wall. We had sculptors come in and carve the snakes and rig them with little tubes where they could squirt smoke through their mouths. They had crystals in their eyes that were backlit and gave them glowing red eyes. It was very reminiscent of the Indiana Jones ride at Disneyland. In each of the statues, there were, of course, real snakes hissing and hanging out of each and every hole in the wall. The Rangers had to make it through the final obstacle to get to the main volcano chamber to meet Malagor and Divatox. And basically they said the script was massive, a series of one adventure after another. The original edit was over 3 hours long, so realistically it had to be cut down. The real problem is that the script was too rich and ambitious, which is a good thing, but was ultimately frustrating. Looking at the concept art for the Serpent's Temple versus the final version, it looked a lot more elaborate, a lot bigger, a lot more like this movie, if it had 3 times the budget, probably could have pulled all of this off.
Oh yeah, I can see that too. I mean, I really wish though that this film, this is going to be weird, but one of the biggest concerns I have with this film, even with the edit version, is with Malagor being like this ancient demonic entity. Like, I still don't understand like why Divatox thought to marry it. That's like one part in the concept that doesn't make any sense. Like, you would think that she just wants to unleash it to use it as a weapon rather than I'm gonna marry this thing. Like, what did she think she was like gonna break that thing open and out of nowhere Devimon or Myotismon was gonna come out and be like, hey babe, let's get hitched for saving me? Like, the fuck?
Yeah, she didn't think that one through because
like
she's
I
crazy.
don't like yeah, well no, I understand she's crazy, but like I like did like any time in production like no one tried to explain to Divatox, like, you know, Hilary Shepard's character, or did they like look at the script and like wonder like what were they smoking?
My guess is that there is something in the script that explains it all.
Because, like, I have a feeling like there was going to be, like, a plot twist that Malagor turned into that monster after he was trapped in the volcano, and that he was at one time supposed to be, like, a hunky, evil bad guy, you know what I'm saying? Like, he was supposed to be, like, you know, a parallel, so, like, that's why Divatox went searching for him, was supposedly, like, he was supposed to be, like, this, like, hunk of a pirate kind of bullshit.
Yeah, and there's like a thing in the movie where she looks disappointed when Malagor shows up.
Yeah, because, like, that's the part that never made any sense to me. I'm like, I feel like that's a part one, like, looking back, it had to be on the cutting room floor to explain why was she disappointed in what Malagor was.
Yeah, it was either cut before they started filming or they filmed it and cut it. I am so upset that there is not the rest of the footage they filmed for this movie. There's no pictures of the rest of the footage they filmed for this movie, and there's no script copy out there. I would love it if somebody out there that worked on this movie had a copy of the full script before they cut it down and just could upload a PDF of that, because that would be incredible to see, because they talk about it in this book as it being really amazing, and I would love to see and read through that script. That would be so cool.
Maybe it wouldn't have made the whole Justin arc, you know, intolerable.
Exactly. Apparently, Austin St. John, one of his conditions to return was that he had to turn evil in the story because he thought it'd be more fun to play.
Well,
So
that makes sense.
let's move on to Turbo, as in the series. So they talked about how Turbo was a challenge because Car Ranger is more comedic than previous seasons, and so that tone ended up trickling into the American show, and they had a tone issue because they wanted to make the show more serious like Zeo was and like push it even further, especially with the big movie burst, but then they had like this really silly footage to work with. It kind of left them in a weird spot trying to write the show and get it to kind of work out. Yeah, I think that what we're going to talk about a lot more is this mid-season switch. So the biggest change came around mid-season. 4 Rangers were replaced by a slightly younger cast. Before the season had started, Jason David Frank had expressed a desire to leave the show, but was persuaded to continue on for a limited number of episodes. At that point, the producers decided that all the Rangers would be replaced at the same time, with the exception of Justin, who was contracted for the season. So essentially, before the season started, they had their contracts for half a season, is what it sounds like, from this end of the story. Other actors may have said, well, we got kind of bombarded, which David Yost got bombarded with, you're not a Ranger anymore, which wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, because like I said, the actors have always said the story is that, like, they kind of it came out of left field, whereas, like, Jason David Frank knew it was going to happen.
Yeah, it sounds like Jason David Frank said he was going to leave the show, and they just decided, let's just take everybody out and start fresh.
I know one of the stories too is Blake Foster said that, like, getting to work with JDF at first was great, and looking back, he was like, nah, JDF's kind of an asshole.
Yeah. And again, they don't go into the darker stuff here. He said there was much better transition of cast and actors than in the second season. We had a little bit more of a heads up, so we were able to integrate the newer Rangers in as guest stars in previous episodes, so people knew who Carlos, Cassie, and TJ were beforehand. I remember
they didn't do Cassie and TJ too effectively.
I was about to say, like, Jackie Marchand, you're not remembering correctly, because Cassie and TJ weren't established. It was Ashley and Carlos, though. Working with leading the actors change over a little smoother to having to write on the fly. What's interesting is that, well, let's see, that's cool. They do these breakdowns of each Ranger actor and, like, their backstory, like, their back history of their acting, like, careers and such, and, like, how they got to be on the show. Like, they do that for every single, like, main Ranger for each season. I think that's fantastic. It's not that exciting to go over in a podcast, but if you're reading this book, that stuff's awesome. All right, big stuff. Midway through the season, the Turbo ride became a bit turbulent when Douglas Sloan and Ann Austin left the show. To get things on track, producer Jonathan Zatcher gave Chip Lynn more responsibility on the writing team. Because of this changeover, some of the storylines, the Phantom Ranger, the Diva Talks Demetria twin plot, the Millennium Message from the Blue Centurion, were never resolved.
But this is the thing that makes no sense, though, is that, like...
Hold on. Jackie Marchand says, though Doug and Ann had planted seeds for the story arc, Chip decided to do his own stories.
This is the thing that I'm trying to say, though, is they did plant the seeds, but how can you plant the seeds for the Phantom Ranger so early? Like, how could you plant the seeds for Phantom Ranger that early when I don't think it was even visible during the pre, cast switch era? Here's
the thing. The cast switch happened before the producer switch. The producer switch would have been after the Phantom Ranger started.
So the producer switch was legitimately at the time of Phantom Ranger, so they had already gotten to those episodes, okay.
Right. Because that's like because of the way that the book flows of its narrative is that it talks about the producer switch happening later.
Okay, because I've always heard that the producer switch came at the same time as the casting happened.
Then again, Power Rangers, looking at that call sheet, they were filming 4 episodes at once, so it could have just been like 3 days later, you know?
Oh yeah, it could have been.
And it could have just affected, 10 episodes. Yeah, then they talk about going into, in space. But basically, it sounds like part of the reason why a bunch of plot lines got dropped from Turbo was because Chip wanted to go in his own direction.
Like, here's the thing I want to know is, do the people that were still working on the show, like, I'm hoping they have some verification on what they were trying to do with the Millennium Message, because there are so many fan theories out there as to what the Millennium Message was, and the one theory that I've floated around and others have floated around is that when Divatox got the actual Millennium Message, somehow word got to Dark Spectre, and that's why the attack in space technically had occurred. Okay, now listen, it led to it occurring sooner than what was it, the year 99 or 2000, like it said.
Yeah,
because like that's the thing is, like, if you state the year that, like, in your message of, oh, I came back to make sure to inform the Rangers that in the year 99 or 2000 that they'll be fighting all of the greatest villains of all time, I'm like, why are you planning for something that's not even here yet? Like, that's what I do sort of hate in some shows, is when the payoff is like, it's going to be in 4 to 5 years. It's like, it makes no sense.
Right. And that's the thing, too, is these plot lines, again, I think the only people on the staff that would know, like, how the resolution would be would probably be Ann Austin and Doug Sloan. But they also probably didn't remember because they didn't go forward with it,
Yeah, because I'm sitting here like, if you were going to go forward, like, I feel like that Millennium Message would have had to been, like, the attack date had to have been pushed up, because it would be like, well, if Divatox knows, then why doesn't she just go, hey, Council of Evil, yeah, we need to, like, move our plans up more, because the Rangers stop us if we attack in 99, kind of BS.
And that's why I think Millennium Message was supposed to be Countdown to Destruction at that point.
That's what I'm feeling.
And I think that was what it ended up being at that point. So, yeah, it sucks that all those plot lines got dropped, because I think the Demetria Divatox one would have been really interesting and would have given Demetria more reason to exist. But anyways,
for sure, because with having 2 actresses playing the same role, you can only go so far for so long.
Right, yeah. Now, it does confirm that Divatox and Demetria were supposed to be twins. Like, that was a thing that, for a while, we're like, oh, is this where the storyline's going? Because, like, they both have sisters, but then they never really followed up on it. And this book basically confirms this, the Demetria Divatox twin storyline, so that does confirm that they are twins, at the very least. In my eyes, that's a confirmation right there. All right, in space. The mega ship set was not a traditional film set. Traditional film sets will be individual rooms that will be in whatever order fits into space, not necessarily connected how they would be within the series. But the in-space megaship set was actually one giant connected set with built-in lighting where they would just have to flip switches on and off for whatever scene they need, and walls that would pull away instead of having to be taken down and moved like normal film sets. You'll have walls are set up with an anchor point and some sandbags. So if they need to move a wall, they just kind of take the sandbags off, get a couple people, lift the wall, and move it away. In space, had walls on hinges so they could pull the wall open, get a camera in there, close the wall. It had enough space for 360 dolly tracks, so you could just get whatever shots you want. Essentially speaking, that megaship set was a fully formed set that works exactly how it should in the series canon itself, which is probably why they kept it around for Lost Galaxy.
I mean, they really need to make sure they, like, saved and kept their money on that one, because, I mean, it was a really interactive set. Like, you could tell it was a very almost Star Trek-like interactive, like, hallways to small rooms they had made on the set, but you knew for a fact that not all the decks were, like, straight on top of each other or below each other. They had to be more like side by side or like, sleight of hand trickery.
Right, and I think that it says they put a bunch of money into it in space. Like, they upped the production budget significantly because they wanted to make sure that In Space could, like, revive the franchise. Because, like, what it sounds like a lot of times when we hear stuff about In Space, like, oh, it was our last season, so we went all out. But the book kind of frames it in the idea that, well, this could be our last season. Let's go all out, but, if we up the production value, we might be able to get people back in, which works.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I don't think Space had too much production level at times, because, like, like just looking back
They
at it,
used
times,
more
it's
Sentai.
50-50.
They did mention this. They used more Sentai footage to make up for the cost of the more elaborate sets.
Yeah, and that makes more sense because like looking back at it, I'm like we see all these sets, but like how effective were they in the show at times? How many times were we just on these sets and didn't have much action? And I'm like it's one of those ones where it went like very 70-30, 60-40, 50-50, depending on your episode, depending on your arc, depending on how they were doing the storytelling. It was a very interesting ride and concept that they built into the show with having that immaculate set, you know?
Yeah. So we actually got some background information on the Ninja Turtles crossover episode.
Oh Jesus Christ! They actually did it. They actually did it.
There's more words about the Ninja Turtles crossover than there are the Psycho Rangers.
Well, that's expected.
But they did get the Psycho Rangers like a whole big page of a nice, high-quality image. So the characters might exist in the same universe during the episode, but the shows were filmed in different places. Next Mutation in Canada and Power Rangers in Space in California. As a result, bringing them together proved to be a logistical challenge. Jackie Marchand recalls, we were able to get the turtle suits for 3 days of filming, so we put our stunt guys in them. So in addition to having different performers in the suits, the voices of the turtles were provided by actors from the Power Rangers camp. So essentially, the turtles, in suit and by voices, weren't played by the people that were playing them in Next Mutation, but were instead played by people that were on the production crew for Power Rangers already.
That makes more sense when I'm like when I tried to watch Next Mutation at one point, and I said to myself, like as an older, going, why do the voices not seem like they line up that well?
It's because they're different actors doing impressions of the voices that were on Next Mutation.
And it makes a lot more sense now.
Yeah, plus when you look at Next Mutation, you get like a lot of the voice actors from Canada that did like Beast Wars and Reboot and such, and you get live action Scott McNeil.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean.
So Jackie Marchand says, after 5 years, we felt like we had done everything with Zordon. We were striving to make a big impact, and that was the most memorable moments in the show. Essentially talking about Countdown to Destruction being, regardless of if the series was continuing, they were planning to wrap everything up with this big finale, because it was just like, at that point, they said, there's something easier about closing out a season. There's more of an impact. You can tie up all the loose threads. We wanted to do complete story arcs at that point. We were writing every season as if it were a series finale. It sounds like Countdown to Destruction. They were like, all right, who knows where this franchise is going? Let's end every season like it's the last. And that was the kind of mentality at the production team, which is probably why we get these incredible season finales from In Space onward. Like, In Space is fantastic. Lost Galaxy, Lightspeed, Time Force, Wild Force, they all had these spectacular endings. And that's probably coming from the same mentality of this could be the last season. And that's I think that's like the best creative mentality to have for Power Rangers, because when you think, oh yeah, we're just going to get another season next year, not as much effort's put into the show. It's very obvious by some of the Disney seasons and especially Neo Saban seasons. So that's just something I thought that was pretty good. They don't mention Countdown to Destruction being originally 3 parts and being cut down to 2, I don't believe. I'll skim through it if you have anything to say in regards to this.
No, like, it's really good that they went with that mentality of, oh, it's a finale, we gotta treat it like an actual finale. Because what annoyed me with earlier seasons is how, in a sense, looking back at it, and even as, as a kid, like, growing up and stuff, watching other shows that had real significant endings, the, overlay from season 1 to 2 with Lord Zed, like, wasn't really as real as an impact as it is. And people say, oh, it's because they censored Zed. Even before the censorship happened, after, like, the first 8 episodes had been filmed or aired, like, they didn't have a real significance of who this Lord Zed character was. It was like, he is actually Rita's boss, and it's like, how the fuck does Rita have a boss, It was, like, a really dumb ideology that I never, ever fully respect or enjoyed because of that mentality, and it just was so ludicrous to me. So it was like, I felt like, how the rollovers for MMPR weren't great, and they just kind of sucked. So it was like,
Zio's finale was also pretty weak.
Yeah, it was weak. It was really weak.
So moving on to Lost Galaxy, they mentioned bringing on Koichi Sakamoto as a co-producer, as opposed to just being part of the stunt team. And Jonathan Zacher started taking more of an interest in what was going on in the Sentai. Sakamoto recalls, I guess Jonathan thought it was interesting to learn the Japanese version of stories, so I'd tell him or the writers, or what the writers' story ideas were. Essentially, I think that we get more Jonathan Zatcher pushing to more adaptations of Sentai storylines, especially Time Force, Wild Force, and later seasons like Samurai, might have come from the fact that he started getting interested in it and learning things from Koichi during Lost Galaxy. So it kind of picks up on that trend, I think, that we see later on in the franchise. Now, moving on, Jackie Marchand was the head writer for the series. She said, sending the Rangers into space proved to be very popular, and we had a good time doing it. Unfortunately, the Sentai we had to use this year was, again, absolutely not in space. So we had to come up with some creative ways to make the Japanese footage work. Basically, it didn't mention it specifically, but I think it's been talked about how Mega Ranger was confused of being space-themed when it's actually video game-themed, and that they had to work around that once they decided, oh, we're doing space stuff. So that's kind of like another thing there in regards to that.
Yeah, that's one of the things about Mega Ranger that is still one of the biggest nuisances, is that they thought it was space because the Megas were all space.
Right, like the vehicles. Let's see. More stuff about just the actors joining the cast. Nothing really too crazy there. Terra Venture was originally going to be called Terra Quest, and they were going to have a bunch of different things like different domes. Like, there's like the major domes of Terra Venture in the series, but there were supposed to be a lot more smaller domes, like clusters of domes underneath all the big domes, which of course just got slimmed down from concept art to actual design.
Is it bad that still, I feel like whoever thought of that was kind of dumb because it just made no sense?
Yeah, not gonna argue that one. Cool part is that the book actually comes with an insert showing the layout of the sets, because just like with the Astro Mega Ship set, Terra Venture was one giant set with a bunch of different rooms built to look like multiple levels of the ship. So everything was interconnected, and corridors, cargo hold, sick bay, engineering, launch pad, all of it was just, you could run through it like it's the actual ship. They just essentially took it as that's the same thing they did with the Astro Mega Ship. They did it to the Terra Venture. It saved them a ton of money. It saved them a bunch of time. It worked out. They said that they were really concerned with the interiors being white because white can throw off the white balance of a camera. And the production designer said, if Star Wars can do white, we can do white too. So we can thank Star Wars for Terra Venture being all pearly clean inside.
That's interesting, because I was going to say Star Trek gets away with it, but then again, their walls are sometimes not always white, but more of a beige, like an offset of white.
Yeah, and more of
for next
a beige and a gray thing. Scorpius is mentioned to be the first animatronic villain in Power Rangers, where he was not a suit at all. It was completely animatronic, and that he was expensive and weighed like 300 pounds, because
I
of course
have
that's what happened.
like, here's a question. In the description, did they ever explain that there was going to be more of him, like eventually like getting a full body, or did they like just say, nah, he was just going to be a head that dies?
I think basically what it's saying in the Trakina portion of this, it mentions that Scorpius, the thing was giant, weighed hundreds of pounds. Occasionally the mouth would malfunction. It would be difficult to move it between sets. And we never had a logical explanation for how Scorpius was the father of Trakina. What it seemed like was that they were probably going to use Scorpius more, but they liked Amy Miller as Trakina more because she was promoted to series regular. She was originally a recurring guest star, but then got bumped up to series regular after Scorpius died. From the sounds of it, and this is just an inferred guess, if they were having issues with the Scorpius animatronic and moving it around and such, that's probably why they're like, let's just get rid of this guy and promote Trakina, because we can work with her a lot easier, and that would get her more into battle. Because Scorpius really wasn't in any fights with Rangers until his episode where he gets killed.
Like, here's the thing that I always found very weird with Scorpius, was why did they make him very octopi-like when octopi arachnid-like when he's supposed to be, like, insectoid arachnid? Like, it was really weird, because I feel like there was going to have to be a storyline where they were trying to make a full-on original suit for him, like an actual suit, because, like, what was he going to do except be a weird little blob? It made, like, the concept of him made no sense, and I really, you know what I'm saying? It's one of those things, like, I never liked Scorpius, and I wish they would have done more with the idea of the character, but, like, I'm glad they sort of went with the, whole Trakina storyline, but at the same time, it was also one of the show's interestingly strong and yet weak points until the finale, where they, finally, brought it to a full close, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and it's funny, because, like, Trakina gets a whole page, and there's like the little blurb about Scorpius, and I think it's just like,
yeah, because I do feel like they maybe were planning to kill him off, but I also feel like they were planning to do more with Scorpius and as a
I
whole.
think they're planning to do more, but after some just like Jaws level animatronic breakdowns, they probably were just like, screw this, let's just go with Trakina. Also, side note, Amy Miller got weird tan lines from the Trakina costume when they'd film in the sun.
That's kind of expected. I mean, she had like really weird spaghetti string like ovular holes throughout the stockings.
And the neck and the chest and the abdomen.
So I mean, of course she's gonna get really weird like tan lines.
They did also give a whole page to Valerie.
It's funny though, because she's naturally tan now. She's like super tan.
This is true. Maybe it's because those tan lines never went away. Valerie Vernon actually did get a whole page about how she had to leave the show, how they were going to write her off. Jackie Marchand says that, I think as the season had more drama than previously, we felt as though we could have a character exit with more gravitas than sending them to a peace conference or marrying them off to an alien. We could do a more heroic superhero departure. See, Valerie Vernon remembers, it was a heartbreaking experience. I loved being on the show and had been working on the set for 6 months when I just passed out. I wasn't getting better, so they had to write me off. They had to change the scripts, not telling anyone it was going to happen, but they did it in a really honorable way. So essentially it sounds like she was diagnosed with leukemia, but she was still working and eventually just had... This is actually probably one of the darker parts of the stories here. It's like she's passed out on set. And that's when she knew that, yeah, she had to leave the show and get treated. Fortunately, in real life...
It's funny, too, because her character was nominally getting better as the show went on, and then it was like, you're dying, girl.
Yeah.
We're killing you off.
Yeah, that's like one of the shames of it, too. It says, fortunately, in real life, Vernon bounced back to health thanks to a stem cell match from her brother and a successful 6-month treatment. During her absence, producers were interested in having Patricia Jolie rejoin the cast of the Pink Ranger, but contract negotiations did not work out. So they turned to another alumna, one who was never officially a Ranger, who officially worn a Ranger's costume before, and that was, of course, Melody Perkins, playing Corone. And so what's cool is that they mentioned that Perkins had no reservations about coming back to the Rangerverse. Saban Entertainment just called me, and I said, okay, she recalls. Perkins found her first day on set to be bittersweet, and she was replacing a beloved castmate. But the team just took me in, and I felt completely welcome. So it sounds like the transition was pretty smooth overall once they figured out what direction they were going with.
They were like told, hey, you're getting the hot, sexy villain from the last season. Make her feel welcome. Okay.
Essentially. And it's good that she gelled with the cast, it seems. And of course, by the time they went to go film the finale, Valerie Vernon got, she got back to health, and so she was able to come film the scene. Interestingly enough, it says the energy surge brings Kendrick Morgan back to life. It was always our intention for her character to be in the season finale, says Jackie Marchand. Personally, we didn't know if she was going to be okay or not, but we got Valerie back and she was well enough to work again. It was extremely emotional when we were watching the dailies of the Lost Galaxy finale and she materialized. Everybody was crying. So it sounds like they weren't planning to leave her dead, and depending on the actress's health, they wanted to bring her back at least for the finale. Because they did want to...
Well, they always stated that was the intention, too, is that, like, they didn't just want to leave her, like, yeah, she is... Like, they pretty much did this thing of they didn't want to do a real consequence bullshit. They did not want to do that. They really were trying hard to avoid that.
There's so much death in Lost Galaxy. I think that was the one they were like, yeah, let's bring her back at some point.
But the funny thing is a lot of the death that does occur happen to, like, no-name aliens and, villains. like in the past.
There's a lot of
villains.
More villains die this season because there are more villains to begin with. But then you also have deaths that stick, like the Magna Defender and his son.
Like, yeah, well the funny thing is his son's a flashback, but Defender was a sacrifice, which is, like, the greatest sacrifice PR has ever witnessed.
Yeah, pretty much. So, essentially, they just talked, this was going to be kind of like wrapping up all the stuff that was left from the Zordon era. Lightspeed Rescue would be a fresh start. And that's where we get to Lightspeed Rescue. So we're at chapter 11. We still got some more to go.
Yeah, I think we're going to end up having to split this into 2 episodes. So
I think we should split it as a Disney break.
All right, well, we'll do that and see how far we can go. Like, because I'm only going to let us continue going for at least another 20 minutes.
Yeah, I can get through Lightspeed, Time Force, and Mod Force in that time. Okay, Lightspeed Rescue. So when we get to Lightspeed Rescue, they talk about emergency rescue team, kind of more of a conscious decision to freshen things. They said, let's do what we haven't done before and see how that goes. So there's no Alpha, no Vulcan Skull. And they wanted to make sure the Rangers did not know each other before becoming Rangers, and that they would not be high school students but working adults. That was like a very conscious thing that they were thinking about.
Like, what do I mean not know each other? Like, even in real life, or just like the idea of the spectrum of like the characters?
The idea of the
backgrounds?
characters didn't know each other ahead of time because in previous
But that's weird
because in
like,
previous seasons
even
they already knew each other before they became Rangers.
even though in Lost Galaxy, like
They met
okay, here's the thing.
before they all got the Quasar sabers, right?
True, but here's the kicker where I'm gonna put in a technicality. Only 3 members technically knew someone previously, and it was Mike knew at least Blue and Pink, and Leo knew only his brother. So I mean, technically, the only thing that kept them together was Mike.
But then you also remember that Maya met Kai and Damon before they got to Miranoi because she came through the portal.
Yeah, but that's the thing is like, but at the same time, even though they get the powers, they don't really know each other outside of Blue, Pink, and Mike.
Right. Here's the thing with Lightspeed Rescue, none of the 5 Rangers knew each other until they're like, here's your morphers.
I guess they're saying actually interacted with each
Right.
other.
Like, they didn't even know each other existed until... Except for Dana, because she got the case files. She's like, here, you're a Ranger now.
Here, this is Men in Black, and this is the last suit you'll ever put on.
So, anyways, let's talk about Captain Mitchell, because this is completely cosmetic, and it's kind of amusing. So, Captain Mitchell was originally supposed to be around 50 years old, but actor Ron Rogue was only 32. Knowing he didn't fit the guidelines, Rogue tried to adapt a more seasoned look as callback. Jonathan Zatcher said to me, "Oh, you look much older today," says Rogue, and I said, "Yeah, I had decided not to color my hair to let the natural gray come through." Well, I was fibbing. I didn't have any gray hair then. I put the gray in my hair. The gray hair continued to be dusted into his naturally brunette hair when he was cast, but the makeup team still felt he looked too young. So for the first 3 or 4 episodes, I wore a fake mustache. A 2-week break for Christmas holidays allowed Rogue to grow his own mustache, though they still had to fill it in for a while. So yeah, he has a fake mustache for the first 4 episodes.
Well, it kind of did look like a fake mustache at times, so I wasn't sure if it was fake or real, because it was one of those Selleck ones where you weren't sure how aesthetically fake it was or how real it was.
Yep. And also, yeah, the gray was him adding gray to his hair, essential. Yeah, more actor backstories. The Titanium Ranger.
Is there any story about... I was going to say, that's what I want to know. Do they ever explain why or how Diabolico actually kidnapped him?
No.
Yeah, that's a plot hole that no one ever really wants to address.
Yep. So, let's see. The Japanese did not do a 6th Ranger that year, and we wanted one. Every time we did a 6th Ranger, the ratings bumped up. For us, there's another chance to write for, so you freshen your stories, and kids liked when a 6th Ranger joined. That's the reason why they added the Titanium Ranger, was because they wanted that 6th Ranger ratings boost.
Well, I mean, it does numbers in America compared to Japan these days.
Oh, yeah, totally. Rhett Fisher needed to arrive on set at 4:30 a.m. every day for the 2-hour process of applying the Cobra tattoo makeup. So, that sucks for him.
Oh, it sucks for him all the times when he has to tell that story, too. Now.
You know what sucks, too? Allison McManus, a week before hiatus, which was in the middle of the season, she shattered her leg. She fell and broke her leg really badly. So essentially, she had like a cast on her leg, and that's why she had the really tall black boots for most of the later part of the season.
You know what's even funnier too is someone even pointed out in some episodes you don't even see the boot on her, like actual boots. You actually see the cast boots through the boot she was wearing, or actually on set. Like if you look carefully, she's not actually wearing shoes on the set at times, and it's the boot.
Exactly. Also, they mention about halfway through the season, Impus matures into the full-grown Olympius, voiced by Michael Forrest, who famously starred as Apollo in the classic 1967 Star Trek episode.
Oh, they actually include the part that we... So they actually mentioned the part that we actually found out why he got the role.
Exactly. They just mentioned that straight up. Interesting story about Jennifer Yen and being Vipra. She says, "I had originally auditioned for the role of Vipra, but another girl got the part. When she didn't work out, they called me back. About 15 other actresses were called on the callback. One of the requirements of the job was to be able to fit into the first Viper costume. The original actress was shorter and smaller than I was, so I had to squeeze into those tight pants. I told myself I was going to do this no matter what, so I subbed in, did a kick for them, and that's how I got the part." So essentially, Viper got the part because she could fit into a costume.
That would explain why they probably never gave her as many roles or lines or scenes as her Japanese counterpart now.
This is true.
Plus, they were probably afraid her ass would probably pop out of those pants.
It's very likely. It's very, very likely. So they also talked about, Aquabase, no surprise, had connected rooms too. It was already something they established.
I don't even call it Aquabase. I just call it the sex lair because Yeah, it's so sexy.
It really is. Rooms right next to corridors, next to a galley kitchen, next to a dive pool you actually go into and made it look like you were swimming out into the ocean. The ready room in the Ops Dome, the Captain Visual, the team features one of several large custom-made fish tanks that appear throughout the base. Boulder was the production designer, employed professionals who would come to the studio to care for the fish when they were being used on the sets. They checked the tanks and make sure everything worked and looked good. You have to make sure the fish are happy.
When you treat the fish better than you treat your actors.
Ron Rogue calls Lightspeed Aquabase was $1 million set. I don't know how truthful that is knowing Power Rangers budgets, but it looks so good, I could believe it cost $1 million to make.
No, he always says it looks like $1 million. He goes, I don't know if it was $1 million, but I estimate it had to have been because of the miniature. When you look at the miniature product, when you look at the actual set work they put into it, like he thinks like the whole process of the whole visual of the exterior interior was $1 million.
Yeah, I mean it looks like $1 million set too. So
like it's one of the only few sets that looks like a Subaraya produced set, like exterior and interior.
Yeah, it looks good. It looks freaking good.
Like I'm expecting them to go fight Gamora, not go fight some fucking demons.
Right? Let's move on to Time Force.
You mean let's talk about Time Ranger?
Essentially. So Jason Font talks about playing Wes and Alex as two completely different characters, and how he was just like trying to he had to try to wrap his head around the concept of talking to himself in the scenes where Wes and Alex were both there. They also had his hair colored different for the roles, blonde for Wes and black for Alex. That way there would be a clear distinction for kids to recognize who was who, because personality.
Well, I mean, when you look at the whole storyline, if I recall correctly, with Ryuga and what's his face from Time Ranger, they did a whole thing of one used a full on slick back, like straight on. You could tell it was overly gelled, overly slicked, and the other one was more natural, just like poofy, permed.
Essentially, yeah.
But I mean, you should be able to tell who Alex is because Alex wears his Time Force suit like it's a stick up his ass.
This is very true. They decided to go with the clock tower simply because they had done spaceships, colony, aqua base. They wanted to go with something kind of small and homey because these Rangers are going to be out of time and they're basically creating a surrogate family in the present day. They also designed the Time Force Police Cryo Prison. The Time Force Police would capture monsters instead of destroying them, and then we could have all the monsters escape, which gave us another story seed. So it's kind of goes into more stuff from Time Ranger that they took.
But they didn't ever actually escape except one time, and it was actually a comedic episode.
Right. Throughout the show's history, the relationships between Power Rangers team members are largely platonic. We would get word from the producers, no romances, because the kids don't like it, says Jackie Marchand. But as a writer, that's like taking a tool out of the toolbox. For Time Force, the producers decided to buck the trend and add a relationship between Jen and Wes. The first episode, my fiance Alex proposes me and then he gets killed, explains Aaron Cahill. I travel back in time and meet Wes, who resembles Alex. Really juicy material. So essentially, they just kind of wanted to change it up a bit and be like, yep, let's have love triangles.
It's funny because there were other relationships developed in other shows, so this is the only time they just went through with actually just doing it, really.
Yeah, and that's kind of what it is.
It's funny, too, because in the Time Ranger footage, there is no love triangle. It's more like she just had a lot of respect for the character.
Right. Let's read some funny quotes from Vernon Wells.
Oh, no. Because, let's just say, it's not just menacing. They're funny and menacing.
Let's see. Wells was asked to audition for the role of the mutant Rancic. He says, I had no idea what Power Rangers was. All I knew was that it was a kid's show. I thought it was something like SpongeBob with voiceovers.
But SpongeBob wasn't out until later, so I see his weird comparison.
Rancic is the first villain to seemingly kill a Ranger. There was an amazing backlash, and of course all the kids were so upset, Wells remembers. Seriously, I'm on the show for like 4 minutes and I'm killing the Red Ranger. I thought, yep, that's the entrance we all want to make, taking the hero out.
I mean, technically, yeah. I mean, compared to the Japanese version where, the one who, the Nadira character poses at, like, the Nadira character, right? She poses as the red, the red Senshi at the time, who's Ryuga, and then purposely uses it as a way so they can actually escape.
Rancic aims to rule the world, but Wells affirms that, like all good villains, he thought what he was doing was right. He considers the Power Rangers the bad guys because they kept trying to stop him.
But at the same time, too, he also had that weird mentality of they were technically humans or proper-born aliens, where I'm, a defect, cryo test tube baby.
I think he would do anything for Nadira. He was like a doting father in reality. He didn't want to see anything happen to her. It was his undoing.
Pretty much that showed him that he had humanity, which was something, hinted at throughout the show.
All right, moving on to Dan Southworth. Before he won the role, Southworth has been appearing as the Black or Red Ranger in live Power Rangers shows since 1995, including one at a Fox Kids event called Fox Kids World, which came to my town when I was like 4, and he was apparently in the Lost Galaxy show for that as the Red Ranger.
Yeah, no, he was one of their stunt actors and suit actors for years.
Yeah, so I saw him live and didn't know it because I was 4, and that was not what I was thinking about at that time. Also, that stunt show was weird because they gave the Red Ranger a really flimsy, additional power-up that was beyond Lights of Orion, which actually looks cool in concept, but it was, all cloth, so...
Yeah, you're going to want to, send me a photo so I can put it in the podcast.
I can find one. Anyways, the Quantum Ranger's counterpart in Mirror Sentai Time Ranger dies in the show's final battle. The writers weren't sure that Fox Kids Network would be happy with this outcome, so they filmed 2 versions for the finale, one where he dies and one where he lives. To no one's surprise, Fox chose for Eric to live. I gotta say that somewhere out there is footage of him dying.
I was going to say, at least the footage of him dying in the, should I say, the, what do you want to call it? The Time Force version is probably more badass than how he died in the Time Ranger version. Because all I'm going to say is, he dies on, a, side building steel walkway up to, a factory door to try to get his pet bird that escaped, and then ends up, getting shot to death, a gang style hit by a bunch of the, grunts of that season, compared to taking the bullet shots for, the kid that, the dad was trying to protect, as well as Wes.
Yeah, that would have been cool. But I'm also kind of glad he lived because he had really great moments in the Wild Force crossover.
Well, no, here's the funny thing too, is having seen Time Ranger, there's one key thing that a lot of people don't know, is Naoto is not so much a redeemable character at times. He's supposed to be this redeemable character, but towards the final arc, the real reason he dies is kind of because of his own fruition of being this super badass, SOB. So spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen Time Ranger. So it's he kind of, while he's redeeming himself, ends up being his own greatest villain.
Pretty much. Let's move on to Wild Force. So Power Rangers, okay, there's a funny sentence here that I have to read because it's just hilarious. Power Rangers had endured through grunge rock, Y2K, the Macarena, and the rise of the World Wide Web and home computers. I just wanted to read that sentence. So, writers Chip Lynn and Jackie Marchand had decided to leave the show following Time Force, so producer Jonathan Zatcher put together a team of new writers. He also brought in director Taru Sakamoto, who had helmed many Japanese Super Sentai series, to direct roughly a third of the episodes. Zatcher, a huge fan of the Sentai show, felt Sakamoto's involvement could help the show adhere even more closely to its Japanese counterpart the Sentai season, Hyakuju Sentai Gao Ranger. So essentially the reason why Wild Force and Gao Ranger are basically the same show is because Zatcher was like, I like Sentai. Let me get a Sentai director. Yay, Sentai.
That's straight up what everyone knows. That thing's even on the wiki up.
Pretty much. They wanted to focus on the Red Ranger, which is kind of obvious stuff. The Animarium set. Let's talk about that for a minute. That set's pretty beautiful. I think it's one of the best looking sets. Putting it together wasn't so easy. See, because they decided that they wanted to make something different from the Sentai, because the Sentai was just a cave. They wanted something more extravagant. But it was also Power Rangers, so everything was rushed. The production designer says, we had no time to design any set or blueprints. This was basically a drawn-on-a-napkin kind of season. She remembers literally standing in the middle of an empty stage without any plans in hand, and I talked everybody through it, she explains. I just stood there for about 6 weeks and said, we're going to put this here, we're going to put that there, we're going to put this cliff wall here, and I want you to carve these hidden things into this cliff face. Boulder worked with illustrator Danny Alvarado to develop the carving of a resting lion that encircles the deck area, as well as a gorilla statue holding a huge banana leaf that drips water into the sacred pool. The set was constructed from different types of foam. There's special sculpting foam that offers really fine details we used for the gorilla. The huge lion was carved out of styrofoam using hot wires and saws, and then carved with a hot coat to seal it.
You know what's funny, though, as you've explained this to me on 2 different occasions, what I was trying to say is that even though she explained it by, a napkin design and pointing, this seems like quite a few interesting, Hollywood budgets I've heard of, where, it just, you can tell it had to be made, on a shoestring moment, because, when you look at the Animarium set, while it looks kind of elaborate, it looks kind of overly dull and lifeless.
Yeah, and on top of that, it has no entrance or exit. And then they bring this up is that they had to like come up with creative ways. Like the thing is that there were no logic created for this either. You would think they were going out, but they never showed the going out. It was never addressed. It was just a jungle, and they would arrive. We would write Danny swings in or Max lands on the ground. The explanation for how the Rangers travel between Turtle Cove and the Animarium simply defies logic. So because they were rushing it, they had no chance at actually designing an entrance or exit to the Animarium.
Yeah, that's the one thing that is really weird, because in the Japanese version, for people who've never probably seen Ranger and those waiting for the Sentai release, they actually never go on to the Animarium, if I recall as much. They actually have this thing called, like, Turtle Rock, which is, like, kind of their, like, communication point to the Animarium. So it's like they go to the rock, they hang out there with, Tetsu, and they hang out, they do stuff, they fight the Org, and yada yada yada. When they need to call the, Gao animals, the power animals, they just, do the basic thing, and then they just come flying down from the rock on the rainbow kind of spiel. The only time they actually, like, really, I think, fought on the thing was in the finale when they fought Senki.
Yeah, I think so. Anyways, moving on. They talk about Master Org being the main villain of the season. They said with both Toxica and Master Org, we had more face characters to recreate from the Sentai than usual. They talk about, it was Gorma 15 from Die Ranger was what was used for Master Org. And they said that they actually did use footage from Die Ranger on the occasion, which is kind of interesting. Don't know how they worked that out, but apparently they did, according to these quotes. And that the season had a lot of budgetary concerns. It was always about how we could shoot the least amount of American footage and use the most amount of Sentai footage. And that's pretty much it on that.
Yeah, no, with Wild Force, they really went cheap, and it shows from the cast, from the sets, from just an overall perspective. I mean, it's not bad to copy a Sentai. It's not really bad. Even though people say it's terrible, I don't think it's necessarily bad. But compared to, Time Force, which was like an impressive copy, which was also its own thing, while being a copy, it's like it was an adaptation where it copied, like, what would you say, 75% to almost 60% of the source material, and was able to still do its own story with the raw concept of, we get sent back in time, we meet a guy in the past who looks like the guy in the future, we join together, we fight a common cause, and then, all of time could end up, unraveling in mere minutes, blah 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 blah. But they added in, different changes and different elements. It wasn't radical, like, crazy like that. Even technically, Go-Go 5 to Lightspeed Rescue. Like, the biggest significance was the final battle. They used, like, 3 episodes before they actually did their own finale. Like, they used most of the final episodes leading up into the actual finale. Now, it does look rather jarring once you've seen Go-Go 5 and go, man, like, that was the end-all be-all. And you're like, damn, like, it's weird that they then did that weird lackluster, we just kicked Queen Ben-Shira into a coffin.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say is that I think everything, like, all the fans think is that, like, when they put in the production cost, you get a better show. Like, we've had great shows with Zeo. I almost said Geo. Fuck you, Kamen Rider. We had Zeo. We had Space. We had Lightspeed Rescue. We had Lost to Galaxy. We had Time Force. Really strong series. Wild Force. Turbo. They were like a hassle, and MMPR was like the testing grounds. It was like just the 3-year experiment. So it's like it's a really interesting thing looking at the original Saban era. The original. And it's just crazy. I mean, it's really well, and I will probably go out and get this book later and be more in depth, where it'd be probably a good thing to revisit, probably, specific chapters in a real spotlight than just jumping over stuff. But I gotta say, from what we got in this first part for our episode, there's a lot of interesting concepts. Some we already knew, I think. I think some of the actors have let it slip, or they might have slightly remembered it at conventions. And some of it also seems freshly new, other than that. But I think this book tries to paint the good side about production a little too well, because it was, helmed by the Saban brands at the time, in a sense. Like, they were the ones who authorized it. So I feel like with Hasbro, we might get a more interestingly, crazily in-depth one in our future. I don't know about you, since we still have a part 2 to do, but what's your wrap-up for part 1?
I think that I really like this book because it does, while it is a lot of stuff we know, stuff we've heard before, a lot of people reading this may not know this stuff, which is pretty nice. it just kind of opens up more things to more people, more information, just kind of in a nice print form too. It's not just the internet. There is just like these tidbits, like we talked about, like deleted stuff from Turbo Movie, deleted stuff from Time Force, deleted stuff from, it's like text information about deleted footage is really nice because I want to see that footage, but at least knowing about what exists out there does leave it to more, more open stuff that there's a chance some of that stuff will pop up. Like with, I realized it was Jackie Marchand that posted the concept art for Race to the Volcano. That probably popped up because his book was coming out. She was like, oh, wow, I have these pictures. Let me send these out. And maybe that's what we'll see is more of that stuff come out in the next few months. Maybe more of this stuff will surface because his book brought awareness to it. Maybe somebody's like, oh, I got this tape that has this crocodile fight from a Turbo Movie. Maybe I should put it out on the internet.
Maybe we have actual, 2 or 3 days worth of footage of Marissa Haggerty as freaking Dulcia.
And her weird pet thing.
Or when Catherine Sutherland had, actual screen testings as Dulcia.
Yeah, it's very possible that we'll see more stuff come out over time. Looking at Jackie Marchand's page, she even has concept art from Malagor where he looked completely different and has that more of a Myotismon look.
That makes more sense. Wait, are you just making this up or are you just being
serious?
No,
I'm being absolutely serious. Give me a second. But yeah, go follow Jackie Marchand on Twitter, guys. She's been posting all kinds of stuff.
Anyway, since we've gone already, almost 90 minutes before our post-production, pre-production, any production, we're going to wrap it up now since, it's been 90 minutes. We could go on longer, but it's getting rather late in the night for us.
We only got through the Saban era,
so we have quite a few more. We got a few more to do. Nevertheless, though, we got, Ninja Storm to try to do Ninja Storm to, I guess, how far does it go? Does it actually go to Super Ninja Steel, or does it kind of just
through Super Ninja Steel to the point where it actually has spoilers for the Christmas episode that didn't just air until last week?
That's actually rather interesting.
Yeah,
so
the book got published about a month before the Christmas episode for Super Ninja Steel and actually goes into deep things about set design for the Christmas episode.
All right, so I mean, that's a good thing that we're going to be doing it after the Christmas episode, especially since we're going to do the, I guess you would say the Neo or whatever. What is it currently called now? This current Saban era.
Neo Saban Era is after the Disney era.
Well, I was gonna say, what's the proper name? Isn't it the Saban Brands?
No, actually, the book references it. Actually, the book references it as the Neo Saban era is referred to by the fan. In production, it's known as the Neo Saban era.
That is rather interesting that they actually used the term.
They actually used the term Neo Saban era.
Japanese brand. I know that with Kamen Rider, it's not actually called Neo Heisei. It's a fan-given term.
That's a Western fan term.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know why I just got dead after he said that's a Western fan term. I'm like, oh.
I just thought it was Western Kamen Rider fandom and started screaming internally.
Oh, just like how I said, Geo, fuck you, Geo.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no. Nevertheless, though, we'll be trying to do everything forward, which is Ninja Storm to Ninja Steel. Great, we're starting with ninjas, ending with ninjas. Kill me now.
Woo!
And we'll see you next week with another new episode of Los Ingobernables de Tokusatsu, which is ironically 69. So, yep, we're getting fucked from both.
Oh, we're getting so many jokes.
Hey, it's Wheelchair21, and thanks again for listening to an all-new episode of Los Ingobernables de Tokusatsu. If you want to hear more content or see more content from the Hero Club YouTube channel, we're going to need you to subscribe, like, comment with some feedback, and share this channel with a friend. We also would like you to check out our website, hero-club.com, and follow us on various social media outlets just by looking up Hero Club for Life, as well as the stores you see are where we shop. Anyways, thanks again, and we'll see you all next time.